So from inside these organizations, when I was active in them, I experienced the same kind of self-censoring and I don't even know, the oppressing when it came to gender identity. Because inside the women's organizations, I told my colleagues and the members of these organizations, look, if anybody can talk about gender roles, gender issues, we are the experts. We are feminists. These organizations have a good reputation. We don't even have to be very radical. We can just say, well, if somebody identifies as the opposite sex, what could that mean? Why are women not comfortable in their bodies? What is gender dysphoria? What do we mean when we say we are unable to live with our breasts, or that we want to identify out of womanhood? What can we say about that?
Hello, Zsófi Balogh, and welcome to On the Record. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me today, Annette.
Okay, so let's introduce you to the audience. Of course, you are a member of the Athena Forum Expert Network. You're a podcaster and an editor there in Hungary for the independent media outlet Partizán. And you've also been involved in work to end violence against women. And if I'm not mistaken, you're also a singer. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
So can you tell us something about your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing there in Hungary?
Sure. So I'll start with my feminism, the history of my feminism. So basically, I was very politically unaware up until my mid-20s. I was not really interested in anything politics related. I was not a feminist at all. And then I was working as a dancer for a while, and I moved to the Middle East. I moved to Egypt. I lived a couple of years there. And I happened to be there when the revolution broke out in 2011. So that was like a big moment where my political awakening also happened. And of course, living as a single woman in the Middle East, I was faced with a lot of sex-based oppression, a lot of street harassment. Of course, everybody knows that Egypt is very, maybe not everybody, but whoever has been to Egypt, even among Arab countries, street harassment is rampant. It has become very violent ever since the revolution as well. So I was also a victim of a very serious mob attack at the same exact time when I was there, on the same exact night, actually, when Mubarak stepped down. Anyway, that's just to say that that's when everything for me, my whole worldview and everything that I was thinking before that about politics, about women's issues, have just a big veil has lifted up. And I was really seriously looking at, okay, what is behind a political regime? What is behind women's oppression? What is really going on? Why do lots of men end up attacking women on the streets in any country, not just in Egypt, but in any country? How is my country doing in terms of women's rights? So years have passed. I was still not working in any kind of feminist or politics related place. I was working as a dancer. Then I stopped dancing. I became a singer meanwhile, and started studying music. And I spent a couple of more contracts over in Jordan, in Qatar, in Oman, so some other places in the Middle East. I stopped traveling in 2017. That's when I moved home and applied to be a volunteer with Hungary's leading domestic violence support organization, NONE, which is short for Women Against Violence Against Women. I became an activist, a volunteer there. I ended up becoming an executive director of NONE for a little while in 2020, 2021. I also worked in their domestic violence support helpline, which covers the whole country. And I also worked afterwards at their sister organization, Patent, which is a legal support service for all issues related to domestic violence, but also reproductive rights. These are two very serious and leading organizations regarding women's rights. They have a big history. Nana has been active for more than 30 years. These are really like the OG feminists who founded these organizations back in the 90s when Hungary started to become more free and democratic. And so they have a history with women's rights and all issues related to women's oppression. So that was a beautiful time for me to learn and get trained about anything that is relating to sex-based oppression. So meanwhile, I also noticed ever since around 2014, 2015, at the same time as in the international arena, activists have started noticing that gender identity ideology is also becoming more and more mainstream, at least in the NGO sector. But in 2015, it was just in my circles, in my personal life, because I was still not active in the NGO sector. Again, I started working there in 2017. But I noticed, because I also came out as a lesbian in 2014, the political awakening and feminist awakening also came with a lesbian awakening. So that was the exact time when my awakening happened, when all this started to appear in mainstream media. You know, we can think back to Bruce Jenner becoming Caitlyn Jenner. It's becoming all over the news in Hungary also, and all these kinds of stories that came out regarding trans issues and LGBTQ. It started to become LGBTQ issues before it was, you know, gay and lesbian rights and transgender issues. It was all operating separately or somewhat separately before around 2015. But after that, I noticed I was going to, you know, protests when there were some kind of either a pride parade or some kind of homophobic attack happening somewhere, and a protest organized here and there in Budapest. And I noticed that the narrative shifted, but it was just in my immediate circles. I was also canceled by my friend group at the time. So in my personal life, and it was because of my...
saying something about gender. You were cancelled by your friend group because you started to raise some doubts. What sort of things did you say?
Yes, so it was a friend group of feminists. There was also a trans-identified male there. We were getting along very well. We went to parties. The conversations were quite honest and open back in the day. But then I actually posted something on my Facebook. I think it was an article that was viral at the time. It was a critique of the Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn Jenner phenomena, saying that, look, this man has lived as a man for 60 years and now we just have to accept him as a woman. It was a very actually kind of gentle critique, but very, you know, good questions about, like, are we just going to pretend that he has been a woman all this time? I posted this without any comments. I just reposted it on my feed. And so this trans-identified male friend of mine basically freaked out on me and then blocked me. And then the whole friend group essentially distanced themselves. And ever since then, of course, they never talked to me again, which is fine. I survived. So, but that's just to illustrate that this was happening here as well already. But these were, like, you know, your little bubbles. The activist sector here, the community, so-called community, is very small, very insular. Everybody knows everybody, you know, for over decades. Whoever is becoming part of this NGO sector, they will eventually meet. All this community will become very familiar very quickly. So 2017, I start working in the NGOs. Meanwhile, I also become quite critical inside the NGO and also outspoken publicly against some of the things that are happening. So, for instance, 2017 Pride, Budapest Pride invites Alok Vaid-Menon to speak or to do a workshop or performance at Pride in Budapest. And I just put out a petition against that and saying, look, beforehand, I was actually approaching Pride personally to ask them not to do this because at the time, Alok, this genderqueer at the time performer, I don't know how he identifies at the moment, but he's an American influencer who has been very active around the issues of gender, very trendy, very mainstream LGBTQ ideology guy. And so I was basically saying, look, this is the type of person who, if you invite, because he was saying very misogynistic things, he was posting things that basically sexualized young girls, and he was talking about kinks regarding children. So it was really just on the face of it, I thought, this is hurting the cause. If we want Hungarian people to accept gays and lesbians and even transgender people, we cannot invite these kind of performers. There are plenty of others, but this will actually hurt our case. So I put out this petition, and at the time it was going somewhat viral, but Pride basically scolded me and said, you don't understand. And Pride was actually actively saying we are a feminist organization. So I referred to that. I was saying, look, if you're really a feminist organization, you cannot invite a person who says things like that, regardless of their identity. Like, I don't actually care about their identity. I care about what they say about women and girls. Anyway, they didn't care. So that was just one instance. And then later on, I left the women's rights organization NONE and joined Partizán as an editor and host. That was at the end of 2020. And I was doing regular video essays about all kinds of women's rights issues, including gender identity ideology. This was the exact same time when the government amended our constitution and put this sentence, the father is a man, the mother is a woman, in the constitution. So they were, of course, very cleverly conflating homosexuals, trans-identified people, and putting it all in a conservative Christian framework. And that has been their narrative ever since, of course, until Orbán was ousted just now. So that was the time when I started talking about, okay, what does this mean? Is there a way to talk about this without having to choose between the conservative Christian narrative that the government is pushing and the liberal mainstream LGBTQ narrative? Because I was stating in my videos, there is a way to talk about this with a feminist viewpoint and critique the things that Orbán is doing and pushing and their propaganda against homosexuals and trans-identified people and women, because, of course, it's a very traditional kind of narrative that they are pushing on people in terms of gender roles. But at the same time, I didn't agree with what the LGBTQ organizations were pushing, which is, well, we need self-ID, and we conflate same-sex attraction with the identity questions, and it's all just a big package in one. And we are not able to talk about things separately. Same-sex rights, trans-identified people, gender dysphoria, these are all separate things that we should be able to talk about openly. I became very controversial in the eyes of the liberal progressive public. And ever since then, I have been shunned online a couple of times over the years. So Budapest Pride one time put out a statement against my shows, and then one of the leading LGBTQ organizations, HATTÉR, also publicly denounced my work and what I am saying in my podcast and in my interviews. And just going back to my career, so I started doing those video essays in 2020, and then I developed my feminist podcast, which is called Zsófi, which is after my name, so it's filtered through Zsófi. And so that has become basically Hungary's almost one and only, or I can say actually one and only, properly radical feminist, taboo-free feminist platform in Hungary. So I have been dealing with all kinds of issues in my podcast regarding women's rights, not just gender issues, but I have done interviews with experts, activists, and all kinds of NGO people regarding birthing violence, women's health care, prostitution, the porn industry, street prostitution in Budapest. I just did an interview about women who end up killing their babies out of desperation, or for instance, the effect of AI and deepfakes on women. Or I did an interview with Giselle Pellico on the channel recently. So, and I could go on and on and on. I did programs about how we supported with some of the organizations I was involved also at the time, Ukrainian refugee women who are mostly Roma women coming from the Hungarian part of Ukraine. So I always pick these, we could say niche issues, but my basic idea is that through my interviews, people can put together a picture about women's rights in Hungary, like on the ground, talking to experts who actually do the work on the ground. So that's what I've been doing, and my podcast is just finishing its fourth season. So I've done already almost 65 interviews, I think. Some of them are in English, so I managed to travel to London and did an interview with Helen Joyce of Sex Matters, and Kate Harris and Robert Wintermute of LGBT Alliance. But I also interviewed a Dutch journalist who was covering sex trafficking in Eastern European countries to Western countries. So I did a show on abortion with a leader of a Vienna clinic where a lot of Hungarian women travel to get abortion, because in Hungary only surgical abortion is available, and it's the regulations are very creepy. So just to give an idea of what I do.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fantastic podcast. I have listened to a few of the episodes. Of course, you interviewed Faika El-Nagashi, the director of Athena.
Yes.
And now from that description, I understand why when you introduced her, you said fellow troublemaker, because you have made yourself a troublemaker in Hungary. But yeah, I can completely see why those conversations would be particularly difficult to have in Hungary when you have a right-wing government. And so it feels like everybody needs to unite against that. And it feels like the only available alternative is this package of LGBTQ quite extreme policies that in many ways go against traditional feminism and women's rights and things that are actually happening to women on the ground. Well, it's a great podcast. Everybody should listen. So today we're going to try and talk a bit about Hungary. There's been this momentous political change in Hungary that we've all seen all over the news, but we want to have a look at what's that going to mean for women's rights, for lesbian and gay rights, for this whole topic of gender and gender identity with Hungary's relationship with the EU. What is going to happen now? What I'd like to start with is for people to understand what kind of things in a practical way were different about life in Hungary compared to, say, an EU country with a more progressive legal framework? Like, how did this actually play out on the ground in terms of, especially maybe media suppression, the kinds of things we've heard about that happened under the Orban regime?
Right. So Hungary is a special kind of animal, I think. Even for our political analysts, it's a challenge to define the nature of the regime that was operating under Orban and Fidesz's rule. So on the face of it, of course, it's a democracy. In terms of legislation, it is a parliamentary decision making, but at the same time, especially in the past 6 years, Orban has been ruling with a very heavy fist in terms of, ever since COVID, the so-called emergency legislation has been always lengthened, and this means that they would just create a new regulation or law in the evening and then vote on it the next day. And of course, they had 2/3 majority in the parliament. What it means regarding women's rights and same-sex rights and all that, even before Orban, so I grew up in the 90s. I remember that, of course, I wasn't really following politics, but I remember it was very hopeful. The civilian sector was very hopeful. NGOs were coming up, and women's rights organizations, as I mentioned, and they have been pushing for legislation. For instance, our law on how do you say this in English? When you're a domestic violence victim and you want to ask the police to remove your partner who is abusing you, restraining order, yes. So our restraining order law was finally, it came into effect in 2008. Women's rights organizations were working on it for years. Our marital rape law is from 1997. That was also the result of feminist activism. There was a lot of activism in the 90s around abortion, because the influence of religious organizations have become more and more powerful. And even though abortion is legal, Orban has introduced this so-called, or his government introduced this so-called heartbeat bill a couple of years ago, and which basically means that women have to listen to this so-called heartbeat, which is not, of course, it's not a heartbeat. And there are 2 consultations mandatory for women who want to have abortions. Only surgical abortion is available. The emergency contraceptive pill is not available over the counter. You need a doctor's prescription. And so also regarding domestic violence, women's rights organizations have been struggling to get the government to really listen to the needs of battered women who need protections from their abuser. Their children need protections. Courts still will fine women who are refusing to take their children to meet the abusive father, because they are legally still required, because courts will protect abusers' right to their children instead of protecting the children and the mothers from the abuser. So the same with police response when somebody is abused. It's very, very hard to get any kind of conviction if you are a victim of domestic violence or sexual violence. So it's a big mess. And of course, so-called LGBTQ rights have been targeted by the government ever since, I think, 2020. That's when they turned it up. Before that, it was migrants who were made the target and the enemy of of the government. And then it became gender, and then it became war. So it was just always these big topics, which meant that the common person in Hungary was unable to think about these things clearly or with some sort of critical thinking, because the government was putting out just one big narrative, like gender identity is bad, LGBTQ people are dangerous, and they are essentially like pedophiles. And they were also legislating on it, and I can go through the legislations quickly for the listeners to understand what's the legal situation in Hungary in terms of self-ID and targeting all things relating to LGBTQ issues. So
the government had almost like an ongoing state of emergency, which started around COVID time, and they just kept that going in order to keep on bringing these restrictions. And if I understand, they sort of lumped the whole LGBTQ, etc. thing together in a way, a mirror of what happens on the left as well, where it's all just put together as one package. So there's no distinguishing lesbian and gay rights from the whole gender identity thing at all. And then in 2021, there was some important legislation, wasn't there, that has recently been judged to be against European core values in the European Court of Justice. So tell us about that. That was about not promoting homosexuality. It was done under child protection, I think, wasn't it?
Exactly. So this is a so-called child protection law. Colloquially, we call it that. Some also call it the pedophile law, and you will understand why in a second. So in June 2021, and I pulled up my notes because I'm very bad at these legal things. I want to be exact. So this law basically conflates homosexuality and pedophilia, making it an offense to promote or portray homosexuality or gender reassignment and transgenderism to minors in advertising and in media. And it also limits sex education in schools to government-approved organizations. So what it means in practice is I also was part of a project where we went to high schools with the women's organizations. They invited us, so the schools would or teacher would invite us to just do a workshop with the students on, the signs of partnership violence, how to recognize, or how to talk about sex and your boundaries regarding, sexual intercourse and dating. And it was a very, very good project. That it was, the pupils were very happy that they could openly and freely talk about their concerns. And it was not about anything related to gender at the time. But of course, because they lump everything together, this meant that these kinds of programs were also not able to go to the schools, and either the schools were just distancing themselves altogether because the law was not very clear, so you couldn't really tell, do you get in trouble if you do a workshop like that or not? So schools and teachers just started to not invite us anymore. At the time, I went to a couple of these schools in the countryside, in Budapest as well. And it was because we don't have a very good system of sexual education, because the government basically prioritized this kind of family-focused education in schools, which is just traditional gender roles and not, emphasizing on women's safety or sexual education at all. So this law was basically making everyone afraid of anything that relates to gays, lesbians, trans-identified issues or people, and gender issues, and sexual education that could touch any of these.
Right. Almost like a chilling effect. Just having the law
Yes.
there's like it just dissuades people from addressing that at all.
Yes.
Again, it's just like a mirror of what happens on the left, isn't it?
Yes, it was very powerful. Now, I mentioned the amendment to the fundamental law. So this child protection law is 2021. The amendment to the fundamental law was already in effect from 2020, November. There is also one other legislation that was important in 2020, in May. It's the infamous Section 33, we call it here. So the Parliament passed this omnibus bill amending the Civil Code and Child Protection Act. And Section 33 mandated the recording of sex at birth instead of sex in the birth registry. And sex at birth is defined as the biological sex based on primary sex characteristics and chromosomes. And additionally, a paragraph was included explicitly declaring that once recorded, sex at birth cannot be amended, and that given names have to correspond with sex at birth. And so the background is, or the context is, that Hungarian given names are gendered and they have to be chosen from an authorized list of male and female names. So this Section 33 is a very important point of advocacy for the LGBTQ organizations ever since then, because they want to push for self-ID and for this Section 33 to be cancelled, because up until 2020, from the early 2000s, trans-identified people were able to request a name change. So you could request another first name from the other gendered list, and you could also change the sex in your documents. And this created a very strange situation for some of these people, because some got stuck in 2020. So they maybe requested a change, or they got the change, and then they made this legislation, and they were some of the people would like to maybe change it back. They are unable to change it back, or they got stuck in the process. So there are a lot of unresolved issues around this, but the organizations have been pushing to cancel this Section 33 law. And they are trying also to, of course, take this to the EU level. There is also a class action case. Maybe it's called class action. Sorry if I'm not correct. Yeah. But there are like 60 or maybe now 80 some Hungarian trans-identified people who turned to the European Court of Human Rights because of this self-ID law. So it will be interesting, and everything is up in the air now as the new government comes into power of what will happen.
Yes. So we should talk about how that all came about. And so the opposition, not just the political opposition, but the people that were opposed to the authoritarian government within civil societies, all the feminist groups and all other kinds of groups. How was the atmosphere between those groups? Because I imagine that they have very different priorities. They might come from very different perspectives. So was there a kind of difficulty in uniting, or maybe like a kind of pressure to just unite and not have more nuanced conversations within those groups, just with the goal of changing the government in Hungary?
Right, that's a great question, and a great point that you are also making with the question, because I was also listening to this ever since the past election in 2022 and leading up to the election of 2022, when the opposition became very hopeful, actually quite unreasonably hopeful that we could change the government in 2022. And at the time, I was already out publicly with gender critical views and saying that, look, we have to address these issues. I was also one of the people were sent out to broadcast live from Budapest Pride in 2021. And there was a moment where I confronted some of the organizers in the live broadcast and asked them point blank, look, when is the time to, because that was when they were publicly denouncing me, and I happened to question them. And then I said, look, I know you don't want to talk about these questions that I'm raising, like what about lesbians' spaces? What about women's spaces? What about males identifying as lesbians and wanting to get into women's spaces, etc., etc. And I said, we have to, like, the movement, so-called movement, would be stronger if we would be actually talking about these questions instead of just pretending they are not there, because their narrative ever since then was, look, we have to pull together, we have to unite, there is no time, it is no time to talk about anything that will divide us. And I thought it was stupid. I always thought that was a very bad argument, and actually pretending that we agree on everything is not going to lead us anywhere. At the same time, I have to say that over these past years, I was waiting for a gender critical, not even a movement, just some organizations either coming out publicly, just addressing some of these questions, some of the developments that were going on in the UK, in the Anglosphere, the Cass report, the WPATH files, anything, the tides were turning in the West already, but Hungary, we're pretending that these don't exist. And our only concern is Orbán and Fidesz, and we are unable to talk about these until we change the government. I did not agree. I thought it was stupid, but I was alone, essentially, apart from a couple of researchers and articles here and there over the years. I was the only one who was publicly and regularly talking about this from a feminist perspective. So meanwhile, of course, the think tanks that were close to Fidesz and Orbán's government were pushing, essentially gender critical views, but from the right and in a Christian conservative framework. So that didn't help, of course. But I thought, who cares? We can still talk freely, because people somehow push this narrative that Hungarians were so oppressed that we were unable to talk about anything. This is not true. Yes, Fidesz was cracking down on the civilian sector, on NGOs. The propaganda was strong. Journalists were targeted. So I don't want to minimize the power of their regime. But at the same time, it was not Russia. We were able to organize freely, talk freely, publish. There was an active operating independent media. But for some reason, this topic was impossible to address, or people refused to address. So from inside these organizations, when I was active in them, I experienced the same kind of self-censoring and I don't even know, the oppressing when it came to gender identity. Because inside the women's organizations, I told my colleagues and the members of these organizations, look, if anybody can talk about gender roles, gender issues, we are the experts. We are feminists. These organizations have a good reputation. We don't even have to be very radical. We can just say, well, if, somebody identifies as the opposite sex, what could that mean? Why are women not comfortable in their bodies? What is gender dysphoria? What do we mean when we say we are unable to live with our breasts, or that we want to identify out of womanhood? What can we say about that? But they were not able to make statements. And I know for a fact that some of it was because there is always one or two people in an organization who are refusing to agree on this. So even though, let's say, the majority of the organization would agree that we should deal with this topic publicly, because of these couple of people who we know are affirming the gender identity ideology, it will just paralyze the entire organization. And so nobody talks publicly. I, of course, get personal messages from people from NGOs saying that, oh, we are so happy that you talk about this, and these are, yes, important questions. I get some messages sometimes from mothers saying, oh my God, my child just came back from school saying that they identify as trans or queer or whatever, non-binary. I don't know where to turn to. I don't know what to do. It's impossible to deal with this issue. I don't have enough information. And of course, I cannot blame them. There is no information in Hungarian. Only the information put out by the LGBTQ organizations who cite the Yogyakarta principles, who cite the W path guidance. So it's all affirming. They train psychologists, social workers all the time about gender affirming care, LGBTQ issues and acceptance, and, the mainstream Western ideology on gender. So it's very hard to go against that. And there have not been enough brave feminists. I have to say, I'm very disappointed and angry at these organizations and at the feminists that have not been able to stand up. And I've been watching this for 10 years and I don't understand why, honestly.
So when you say that there is somebody in an organization who's very committed to the affirming approach, and so that makes it difficult for the organization as a whole, especially if that person is senior, are you talking about what we sometimes see, like somebody who has got a trans-identified kid, basically, and they're affirming their trans-identified kid? Because I was under the impression that that was really not happening in Hungary. But you say there is information available in Hungarian, but it's all very affirming along the lines of the kind of EU approach. So I just didn't think that was happening in Hungary, but they are affirming kids. Is there, actual medical treatment for trans-identified children and young people in Hungary? Because I thought that just wasn't the case.
Right. So, and you cannot be blamed for that because it's not out in the open. So if you just look at the statements and campaigns on the social media of the LGBTQ organizations, it's very superficial, it's very general. So they would say, we have to push for acceptance. Like, for instance, they are now, of course, campaigning and advocating with the new government, like pushing them to address LGBT issues, as they say. And what they mean, or what they actually state, is, we have to push for equal rights for LGBT people. Well, what does it mean? They don't say. They just say equal rights, and everybody just looks at it and say, of course, we have to have equal rights for everyone. So I think it's a very clever way that they are doing it. But if you actually go to their website and download their surveys, their studies, you will find information in Hungarian about what kind of gender treatments are happening. I was just reading one of the surveys that were talking about the so-called gender-affirming healthcare in Hungary. And so there are dozens, if not hundreds, of people who are taking hormones that are confirmed in this study. There are maybe more, but basically what these surveys and studies reveal is that there is no proper regulation around, for instance, hormone treatments, but at the same time, people do get some doctors to prescribe them, and they go around the legalities. So, for instance, one of the treated trans-identified young people said in the interview in the study that she is treated sorry, it was not a young people. It was an older woman who identifies as male, who said that they are treated for menopause, but it's actually a hormone treatment for the gender dysphoria, she says. So, and then there are a bunch of young people interviewed on how they actually get these treatments. Some of them had breast removal, some of them had their uterus removed. Very, very few go through the actual genital operations, but some do. And there is a clinic in Hungary, in the countryside, that trans-identified people know about and go to. it's actually a crazy story because one of the doctors have been arrested because she was using the government funds to treat these patients and the government infrastructure to treat these patients as a private practice. So there are just a lot of things that should be revealed and uncovered because nobody knows about this. Actually, there is a so-called gender clinic in Belgrade, which is of course very important in the region because trans-identified people would go there for surgery, and this doctor actually was trained there with this famous Serbian doctor. So in Hungary, the information is available, but of course it's under the radar. So when you go to the forums of trans-related issues, people will suggest to each other, oh, this psychologist will give you a paper in order to get your treatment, or go to this doctor or this endocrinologist, they will give you hormones, or this is how you need to trick the system to get it. So it's very unregulated as it is because the healthcare itself is a mess in Hungary, and this issue, of course, is not addressed at all properly. So, but at the same time, I hear from my feminist colleagues and friends who are mothers and have teenage sons and daughters that identifying as queer, non-binary, trans is quite popular and has been in the past years, but nobody talks about it.
That's amazing. Really interesting to know. I think people outside of Hungary also would just assume that that's not happening with such a conservative government until now. And of course, it all came to an end quite dramatically last year. I'm going to skip over it quite quickly. There was a constitutional amendment, wasn't there, in 2025 that effectively banned public assembly or put severe restrictions on public assemblies, which of course effectively banned the Pride Parade. And in response to that, there was a massive Pride Parade. And was that where the kind of momentum started to feel like that it was really going to be possible to get rid of Orban? I suppose you went to that Pride. How was that?
I did not go.
Oh.
So I have a messy relationship with Pride, and it's because I have been singled out by them in a public statement that they hate what I have to say. So I don't go to Pride, which nobody cares, of course. I could go, but at the same time, it's a matter of principle for me. But we did do, my channel Partizán did do a live broadcast all day when it was going on last year, and I was interviewed. Actually, I was just there before the march happened to be interviewed about what I have to say on LGBT issues. But I did not go to the march, but it was historic. It was one of these moments where the opposition really pulled together. And Orban, I think, also realized, oh, okay, this is not going to be as easy as he thought it was going to be. So basically, the momentum has been building ever since 2024, when in February, the now Prime Minister Péter Magyar has appeared basically out of nowhere, actually on Partizán in an interview, because at the time there was a big scandal around child abuse, and a supporter of a pedophile who got clemency from the government. It all broke out just like that suddenly, and Péter Magyar appeared, who of course was before the husband of the Minister of Justice, and he was also a diplomat, and he held some kind of position with Fidesz in the
He was
EU.
an insider anyway.
Yes. So, and ever since then, he has been building his party and the support from basically the entire country. I have to say that it is quite impressive what he was able to achieve. His approval rating is now, I think, at 70%, or his party's approval rating. It was quite amazing how he was able to speak to the common people. everywhere in Hungary and in Transylvania and around Hungary, basically uniting people, saying, okay, we have to get rid of Orbán, we have to unite. And I have to say, I was very pessimistic and suspicious of him. I still am suspicious, but I thought, oh, he's just gonna be this like crush for the Hungarian people for a couple of months and it's all going to blow over. I really thought that the opposition was just so weak and embarrassing because of our previous history in the previous elections that it's going to be impossible to unite against Orbán. And of course, our election system is very heavily was helping Orbán to stay in power and his government. But the election system also helped tip over after a critical mass was supporting the opposition to put Magyar Péter's party in a 2/3 in the parliament now.
Because he didn't just win, he got that absolutely crucial 2/3 majority, which means, I think, that he can make changes to the constitution and start to roll back some of the things that Orbán did. Is that right?
Yes.
So now he's won is this momentous change, and I think in the international media, the kind of general vibe is, and Hungary lived happily ever after, you know, it's kind of like, okay, that's it. It's done now. Now Hungary is going to be back in holding hands with the EU and it's all going to be great. But I sort of get the sense that it's not going to be that simple. So, I mean, I don't know much about this Peter Magyar. He doesn't look like a radical feminist. I don't know. What do you think? How is it going to be going forward in Hungary?
This is the million forint question because yes, it is up in the air. It is very hard to tell. Of course, he promised everything. His ministers have just been appointed, and his cabinet and all the people who will be around him. It is a very impressive list of experts and people who are refreshing to see after Orbán's government, because Orbán has really built up a network of oligarchs that stole everything from Hungary. Like, the corruption is insane. And this is what Magyar Péter was able to build on, of course, in his campaign. So now, just to give an idea of how we can look at this in terms of our topic and the feminist issues. So one of his minister appointees at the time, a couple of weeks ago, in a public hearing, was asked by the now opposition Fidesz KDNP representative, kind of, you know, like trying to provoke her and test her. She was going to be the Minister of Education. Now she's sworn in, so now she's already the minister. So she was asked, well, what about, you know, the LGBTQ question? What are you going to do about that in schools and in education? And what about, you know, all the dangers that this puts on young people? And she was able to just dismiss this whole question, saying, well, have you seen any gender or sex reassigned, surgically sex reassigned kindergartners? Because I haven't. But at the same time, I have seen children being left behind by the system, which is a very clever way of dismissing the entire issue. Of course, because the common person in Hungary will not understand what, you know, Athena or you and I are talking about as dangers of the LGBTQ issue. But she is able to build on the previous regime's really awful treatment of children in schools, because we have serious problems with segregation of Roma pupils from white pupils. We have insane underdevelopment and underfunding of education institutions. We have scandal after scandal of child abuse in child protection services and institutions. So it's true that this is not the main pressing issue. It's true. But at the same time, it seems that they are I mean they, as in the new government, will not address this in a nuanced way, because they are able to just point to Fidesz and say, oh, the previous government just made an enemy and a target out of the gender issue. So we are focusing on the real issues now, which really affect Hungarian people. So I suspect that, again, this topic will just be marginalized. There are no feminists or radical feminists so far in the cabinet or in the parliament. Most of the appointees so far are either conservative or like liberal but religious, or progressive but very they come from this management corporate class, or they are experts who have no idea about anything women related. Even the issues of women are not framed as women's issues. They are framed as issues of equality or issues of the family or issues of child protection. But if you look at them, they are women's issues.
And I mean, even though it might be possible for the Hungarian side to sort of push the issue to one side and say this is not our top priority, I mean, maybe what's more worrying is that for the EU, it is quite a big priority. The EU Commission has their LGBTIQ plus strategy, and there are a lot of frozen Hungarian funds that Peter Magyar's job is to get back as soon as possible. So is it possible that if he just doesn't really care about this issue, he might be happy to just make concessions, give the EU what they want, because he thinks, well, it's no big deal? So is that something that's a worry?
I actually was debating with my feminist colleague on this exact question, because she said, well, she doesn't think that this is gonna go through. Like, we can trust Péter Magyar's conservatism, and I said, no, I think that he actually can just, accept gender identity as a list, a part of a list of whatever basis of discrimination in a legislation, because there is very real political gain for him if he does that. Like, all progressives will bow down and love him for it forever. At the same time, it would not have any cost for him, because he can say that, he's following whatever the European progressive tendency is. So I don't know. Actually, nobody can tell, because we still don't know how this government is going to work, even how it's going to be between him and the ministers and the parliament. We still don't know how influential he wants to be. Is it going to be him that has a final say in things? Will he be able to delegate this issue and just say whatever my cabinet will decide, or the parliament will decide, and I will not address this? Because he has been avoiding this topic forever. So ever since he's come out in 2024 publicly, he sometimes is asked the question, well, what about, LGBTQ rights? And he would just say something general and try to be very diplomatic. But the LGBTQ organizations are and will be pushing for self-ID, and Pride is coming up in June in Hungary. I will be very curious what is going to go down, because TISA, the new ruling party, will have to say something, and they will have to address some of the questions, not just in a general way. And I'm quite fearful that they will not be willing to look at it really in terms of concrete questions. Like, they will not be able to separate same-sex issues from gender identity and all that jazz. In terms of the EU, That's also a big question because all the organizations who operate, the NGOs in Hungary, the human rights organizations, they all rely on EU funding. They are not able to get any money if they are openly critical or if they don't include some sort of LGBT or inclusion policy. And they are strategic, like some of the women's organizations, I know that they will not push for anything related to gender identity, but in order to get the funds, they have to apply in a way that they somehow frame it as being inclusive, and then they get the money and they can spend it on women's services, but they will not be able to not address this forever.
So it sounds like you're kind of optimistic in the sense that it's good that Orban's finally gone, but also a little bit pessimistic maybe. How do you feel on the optimism pessimism scale looking ahead?
Well, okay. One part of me is extremely happy. We had to change the government. No question about it. I'm super proud of the Hungarian people for making it. Honestly, I did not think this was possible. As I said, I'm a pessimist. But now I'm really looking forward to the uncomfortable conversations that people will have to have eventually, and the liberals and progressives and the NGO sector and the intellectuals who have not been able to talk about the issues of gender because they were always hiding behind this alibi of, oh, Orban, we cannot talk about anything because he is so dangerous, and we have to pull together. So now that's done with, and the new government will have to answer some questions. They will have to legislate. They will have to say something to the EU. They will have to address some of the demands of the progressive LGBTQ crowd. So I'm just honestly opening my popcorn. At the same time, of course, it's not funny because just now I published an interview with a Brazilian feminist, Isabella Sipa. We recorded this in Morocco. It's in English. It's very interesting if your viewers and listeners want to take a look.
Yeah, it's really good. I watched that. That's a great
interview.
Oh,
thank you. So the effect of that interview was quite harsh in Hungary. I thought, because I've been doing these kinds of interviews in English and in Hungarian for years, and there's always backlash. Of course, I count on it. I know it. But now I was surprised how unhinged the online mob was, because I have been denounced. They have been calling for me to get fired from Partizán for a long time. But it feels like, and this is just my general feeling based on how this mob was behaving, because this interview came out after Tisza won the election, that they are now really going after anybody who's gender critical. And because there are not a lot of examples, it's basically me in Hungary. Honestly, I can't believe I'm saying this, but there are no other people who will publicly really radically state the truths. There are some people, academics or journalists who will be critical, but they will be diplomatic, they will be strategic, they will not really go into what this means for women and girls and lesbians. Anyway, so this interview was published and they came after me. And ever since then, on the Partizán's posts, they are calling for me to get fired. So I feel like it's even harder now to speak out than before. And I don't know who will have the courage. And we have not been able to produce a real LGBT-focused movement, or even just an organization. I was involved with setting up an LGBT Alliance satellite organization here in Hungary with a couple of gay friends, but they never wanted to do anything. And I was just mad. I was like, I can't do this. Why are we not active? Why are we not doing anything? So I'm just like, my in my own little island, basically, trying to produce some information on that topic.
Well, you're there leading by example and speaking publicly, and it's not easy, as you said, but you've survived it. You're still there. You haven't been fired. And so this podcast is called On the Record, and kind of the whole idea is women especially, but everybody saying these things that are very reasonable and, were completely normal until 5 minutes ago, in their own names and on the record. So do you have any encouragement for people that are maybe a little bit cautious and they're just not really sure if it's a good idea to speak up? Will they survive it? Should they do it?
The short answer is yes. My other answer is I'm tired of these people. I honestly, I'm tired of people being very insecure about this and not really sure. I'm tired of it. I'm mad.
Or saying to you, that they're so glad that you're speaking, but not speaking themselves.
Yes. And I'm tired of the questions, not from you, from these kind of questions from people. Oh, should I do? How should I do it? What should I do? How should I? I'm tired. I'm done. I don't care about their insecurities. Either do it or don't. I was just meeting up with some of the radical feminist lesbian friends of mine. And I was also mad at them because they were just contemplating on this topic, oh, should we have a think tank? Should we have should we write articles or I don't know. I don't want to appear with my face and name. So I don't know. I could be in the background, but somebody should do it. And I just said, I can't listen to this anymore. I'm tired of these kind of arguments. This is never going to be easy. Never. It's not going to be easy before Orban. It's not easy after Orban. It always has a cost. Feminist courage will always have a backlash. You will never be popular if you're really feminist and if you really want to speak on women's issues in a radical way, in a real way. You can do liberal feminism, and you can be popular, but that's not feminism. That's not going to have any real effect on women. So I'm tired of these people who of course, on a personal level, I empathize, I understand their reasoning, blah, 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 but I'm just tired. You have to say something eventually. And if you are always waiting for other people to do it, I'm sorry. I have been waiting over the years. I thought, okay, in the beginning, I'm alone, but then years are going to pass and I'm going to see some other people speak up. I'm going to see some other feminists or groups or I don't know. I mean, I don't know, 10 years have passed since I've been paying attention to this topic and nothing. And I just don't know what people are waiting for. And I can't accept any of their excuses anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, the time is now. That's it, isn't it? The time is now. It's time to speak up.
Yeah.
It's time to just say it because it's not unreasonable. We're right about all of this.
Yeah.
Well, that's the perfect note to end on. So, Zsófi, thank you so much for everything you do there in Hungary and also for going on the record.
Thank you so much for having me, Annette.
And that was On the Record. Thanks for listening or watching. There are more episodes on the way, so don't forget to subscribe via the Athena Forum Substack or wherever you found this. If you're curious about Athena Forum, you can visit our website, athena-forum.eu. If you like what you see there, you can sign up to make a regular donation to support our work. We don't have institutional funding or any funding really, aside from people like you who believe in defending sex-based rights, democratic values and political courage across Europe. See you next time.